The best way to tell if someone is guilty and the best way to get to the truth is to listen to people's words. Because people, on average, have vocabulary of around 30,000 words. They go into that vocabulary, they pick the words they're going to use within milliseconds. They construct those words according to the rules of grammar, and then they present those words to you in a way that reveals what their intention is behind the words. It is very, very difficult to lie convincingly. It's virtually impossible. Upbringing, education, and many other factors shape how we speak, but they don't typically affect our ability to spot lies. However, it is harder to detect deception if the subject is under 11 years old or is on the autism spectrum. When JonBenet Ramsey passed away, her brother Burke was both under 11 and seems to be on the spectrum, making it extra difficult for us to determine if he was truthful during his police interviews back then and even today. So we'll go over how to address those issues in this video. I'm Deception Detective. I'm an attorney trained in statement analysis, and this channel exists to expose lies and manipulation. Before we proceed, please hit the like, subscribe, and notification bell. Also, if you tap that thank you button, I appreciate it. In today's video, we'll break down a part of Burke's interview with Dr. Phil. This is the 7th video in my JonBenet series, and it's the 3rd video focusing on this specific interview with Dr. Phil. Without further ado.
Do you remember them asking you if you knew what happened to your sister?
I told the guy, I was like, she's probably hiding somewhere. Did you check the whole house? Or maybe she's outside, or...
Who suggested for you to search the house?
Linda Arndt. She said, take Fleet White with you and search the house, see if you notice anything out of the ordinary.
He should not have been allowed to search that house by himself. He could have tampered with evidence without even knowing that it was evidence. That's a critical mistake.
So where did you begin?
Went down to the basement.
Why start there?
It's the most logical entry point. Went into we called it the train room. The kids had a train set up in this. There was a window open. There was a suitcase sitting under the window, which shouldn't have been there. And I noted that and mentioned it to Fleet.
If you've seen my series on JonBenet, or even if this is the first video in your feed and you've not seen my previous videos in the series, I'll just bring you to the table quickly. In my opinion, what happened is Burke accidentally, or in a fit of rage, killed his sister and then his parents in order to protect him from having the stigma of being a murderer for his entire life. Or even, let's say they're narcissists. Out of a narcissistic desire not to be embarrassed by being the father or the mother of a little boy who killed his sister, decided to cover up the crime and stage a kidnapping. And lots of the things that the parents say, and we've analyzed multiple interviews at this point, lead me to that conclusion. So outside of the physical evidence, what we do here on the channel is listen to the words people use. And here John just said the most logical entry point for a kidnapper would be the basement. However, he did not check the basement until the police were on the scene, right? Until he had witnesses watching him go down to discover the body. If it was so logical and he was aware that the window was broken down there, why not check that immediately while you were waiting for the police? Does this inconsistency or this seemingly irrational decision mean that he's lying? Of course not. But we do note it. And among many other plot holes in their story, this is yet another. It's another poker chip I'm setting down on my bet that they are in fact lying and they know more than they're admitting here.
I said that shouldn't be there.
You knew there was a broken window downstairs, right?
Well, I had broken that glass and then opened the window to get in previous summer because I'd left my key and Patsy was gone. I thought we had it fixed, but we never went in the basement, so I didn't know that. So I wasn't surprised that the glass was broken, but I was surprised that the window was open.
So you come to this door and it's closed. And what's in that door?
Well, we called it the wine cellar, but there's never any wine in it. It was a junk room. I was just going through methodically every square inch of that basement. And I opened the door, and there's JonBenet.
Coming up,
Did you know she was dead?
Another thing to notice is his switch from past tense, so I opened the door. When someone's telling a true story, you expect them to tell you things in the first person, past tense, in the order that they learn things, right? So I would expect him to say, I opened the door and I saw JonBenet on the ground. Not like something out of a movie script where he says, I opened the door and oh my God, there's JonBenet. It's almost as if it were scripted. I opened the door, I believe all that, and now the reason he switched to present tense is because he's fabricating in the moment the shock. There's JonBenet. Instead of saying, I opened the door and I saw something in the dark on the ground and I bent down and I lifted off a blanket and I realized it was JonBenet. There seems to be an element of dishonesty in that part of the story. Now, this could certainly just be because he's told this story so many times at this point. But I'm just pointing it out here because in other series we do, you'll notice very, very big jumps between past and present tense. And it's very clear that when someone switches to present tense, it's because they're making up that part of the story in the moment. And we saw this a lot with Amber Heard.
We now return to a Dr. Phil exclusive.
Take me through the moment that your eyes fell on JonBenet's face as she was lying there on the floor. Did you know she was dead?
No, not at that point. I mean, I had this rush of, thank God I found her. And it was just this overwhelming sense of joy that I'd found my child. And her hands were tied over her head. She had tape on her mouth. I immediately took the tape off. Her eyes were closed.
Could you, at that point, perceive her injuries at the time? Could you see her neck and her head?
No, I didn't. There was a red spot on her throat. I didn't see the garrote because it was too deeply embedded in her skin. And I just was hoping she'd wake up.
Regarding the garrote, lots of people say, hey, DD, how could Burke have killed his sister if she was strangled with the garrote, which is hard to make, and a 9-year-old boy might not be able to actually execute someone that way. Well, one of the big issues with this case, like so many other unsolved crimes, is the mishandling of forensics. So we saw mishandling of forensics in the Amanda Knox case, in the Nicola Bully case, and this case. According to the coroner's report, it's unclear whether JonBenet died because of the garrote due to asphyxiation or because she was hit over the head with something. So just a bludgeoning. And based on what I've come to in this series from analyzing these interviews and what the parents have said and now what Burke has said, I believe that it was Burke who bludgeoned JonBenet, who hit her on the head with something, whether it was by accident or out of a fit of rage. And the parents actually used the garrote to stage the execution. The same way I believe they wrote the ransom note. So people can do extreme things in extreme situations, including putting a garrote around their daughter's neck in order to make a crime look more professional, more mafioso, like a kidnapper executed her. Also, according to what I've seen so far in my comments and news reports, just from the brief background research I've done, everything to create the garrote came from inside the house. Same with all the tools used to create the ransom note. A kidnapper typically is not going to go into a house and start wasting time creating their execution tools and creating the ransom note with things that they discover in the house, because they might not find the things they need anyway.
And began to realize that she wasn't going to, and just started to scream. I picked her up, carried her upstairs. I don't know what I was thinking, but I was just horrified. I couldn't speak. I was just screaming, and I took her upstairs and laid her down. I guess I was taking her to help in my mind. I didn't perhaps want to accept that she was dead. Linda Arndt knelt down beside her, as I was, and felt for her pulse and looked me in the eye and said, "She's dead." And that's when I was just stunned. She looked very peaceful.
One of our friends ran in to the room and said, "We need an ambulance." Tried to dial 911, and I kept screaming, "What is it? What is it?" And, then in just a couple minutes, then I walked into the living room.
What Linda Arndt said is that your eyes met, and she knew in that moment you killed your daughter.
Linda Arndt has stated publicly that when she saw John with JonBenet, it was like 1,000 lights going off in her mind. She knew exactly who had killed JonBenet.
Another thing I see in my comments is, hey, Dee Dee, Linda Arndt was a terrible detective. How can you believe anything she says? I don't, right? So you have to escape binary thinking. Just because Linda Arndt is a bad detective doesn't mean the Ramseys are innocent, right? One person being bad at their job doesn't make the other person a good guy. Both can be bad. I believe the Ramseys staged a terrible fake kidnapping cover-up, and I believe Linda Arndt was a terrible detective for jumping to conclusions and allowing the parents to contaminate the crime scene, like they pointed out earlier. Why was John allowed to go down to the basement to discover the body and move evidence, totally disturb the scene? So just because Linda Arndt is bad doesn't mean that John and Patsy Ramsey are good. John and Patsy Ramsey being bad doesn't mean Linda Arndt is good. They can both be terrible. And I think they are. I think Linda Arndt was incompetent.
At one point, she said she was so worried that she was in the presence of a bad person that she was counting the bullets that she had on her body, and she had 18 bullets because she feared she might have to shoot her way out of there.
Frightening and incompetent, beyond incompetent.
So one of the few things that John and I agree on.
Shouldn't have been a police officer.
There's a detective, Linda Arndt, who deals with various emotional cases, not a homicide detective, not a kidnapping detective, because the Boulder Police Department didn't have those experts.
Is your interpretation that she thought she was going to have to shoot everybody? That
Yeah.
she went all in on
I think her comment was, I looked around and counted the people and then counted the bullets in my gun. I mean, this is crazy stuff. Absolutely crazy stuff.
When was the next time you saw your parents?
The next thing I remember is going to another one of our friends' houses. Everyone was really sad over there. My dad came and told me, JonBenet is in heaven now, and he started crying. And then I started crying.
One of the things I pointed out in my previous videos about Burke, if you're new to the channel, we do not analyze body language on this channel. So the fact that he's smiling or looking down to the left or the right or sitting in a way that seems to be a little bit too casual or a way that's too nervous has zero impact on our analysis. We're strictly listening to what he says. However, I've scrubbed through this interview because there's so many little commercials and teasers in it, and I just want to make sure that we skip over those and they're not included in my video. But at some point in this documentary, we're going to see Burke's interview with the police. So the police interviewed him when he was 9 years old. And that is a very interesting interview. And it's something that we haven't seen before on the channel, how to analyze a child. So in that part of the video, we're going to look at 4 things to consider when you're analyzing a child, but also someone who is cognitively atypical. For example, I do think that Burke is on the spectrum. I'm not a clinician, so I can't diagnose him, but the way he acts seems to be consistent with someone who has autism. So some of these things that we're going to consider when we analyze him as a child, we're also going to consider here and now when he's being interviewed. So no, we're not going to look at his smile. Doesn't seem to be Duper's delight. His posture doesn't seem to indicate that he's deceptive, right? These are not things that we entertain. Let's just listen to his words. And as he says things that seem a little bit atypical, I'll point those out. So in your own life, if you're interviewing someone who has autism or is on the spectrum, or if you are yourself, you can be aware of these things.
It was all really sad.
Okay, so actually it happened sooner than expected. So if you're listening on podcast mode, you can't see this. But if you're watching, you can see here that this is an insert of Burke's police interrogation from back in 1996.
Have it now, and he started crying. And then I started crying.
It was all really sad. And my dad told me that JonBenet in heaven.
So Burke says, I saw everyone was sad inside, and my dad told me that JonBenet was in heaven. There's not much to glean there. It doesn't really go towards his guilty knowledge or innocence. However, we can address one of the bullet points here. So when you're analyzing a child, I'll just go through these. There's 4 things to consider. And there's actually special training for police to interview children because they are so difficult to analyze. It's so hard to determine if they're lying or not. And there's lots of famous cases where multiple children were telling the police that horrific things were happening to them in a kindergarten, and in reality, it was totally made up. All right, so first of all, children may echo your expectations. So if a kid thinks that you want a specific answer, they might just say that answer to please you. So instead of telling the truth, they're trying to tell you the answer that you want to hear, which is what happened in those cases. The police were insistent that the managers of the daycare were abusing the children, and they were asking the children leading questions. And the children, wanting to please these police officers, said whatever the police officers wanted to hear, right? They're trying to anticipate what the police wanted to hear. All right, so they may echo your expectations. Second, they might respond without understanding. So a kid might answer even though they don't fully understand your question. So you have to be aware of that. You have to make sure that they understand your question instead of just accepting their answer as if it's clear that they understood it. Third, their sincerity can stem from mistakes. So kids get mistaken easily. They might be confused. But they might be so mistaken that they actually think they know what happened, and it comes off as totally sincere and honest, when in reality it's totally wrong. But they're mistaken. They're not aware at all that they might be mistaken, so it sounds true. And then finally, children can blur fantasy and reality. So under the younger they go, the more you have to be aware of this. So these are 4 factors to consider whenever we're listening to these inserts of Burke's interview with the police.
So you go from thinking she's missing to she's been found. She's actually dead. She's in heaven. Your dad tells you.
My dad just said she's in heaven now, and I was kind of like, how is that possible? Like,
and what did you say?
I just started crying. I don't think I said anything. I didn't believe it at first.
You must have realized this has gone way bad. Ready to get real? Go to Dr. Phil.
Are Patsy Ramsey's writings getting red flagged by Boulder cops?
3 days after she gave police a 4th handwriting sample, the mother of JonBenet Ramsey is being asked for a 5th sample.
The ransom note was a big monkey wrench in this case, and it threw everybody off. The police thought Patsy...
Regarding the ransom note, I've analyzed that in my video, How to Analyze a Kidnapping, as well as Patsy's 911 call. And the conclusion I came to in that video is that Patsy probably did write the ransom note, and it was probably being dictated to her by John. And the 911 call was staged.
He wrote it.
Your mother found a ransom note. Have you read it?
I don't think I've read the whole thing. I've definitely seen pictures of it, though.
I think law enforcement found it odd that there would be a ransom note at a murder scene. Some police have been suspect that your mother actually wrote this. Does that look like her handwriting?
All right, so let's switch over to part 2.
What's your name? Are you happy, Ramsey? I'm the mother. Oh my God.
There's a lot of debate about where you were when that 911 call was made.
What took place on that tape has led to some of the conspiracy theories.
Police investigators say your voice was heard saying, "What did you find?" Did you speak those words?
Autopsy results did find undigested pineapple in...
I will say Dr. Phil knows how to tease something, because these are the questions I want to see him answer. We've been analyzing this interview with Burke this is our 3rd video now, over 2 hours. And we've seen some good questions, but all of Burke's answers are a sort of evasive hedging that is typical of liars. However, he is atypical. All this happened when he was a 9-year-old. So the fact that he hedges his statements with exclusion qualifiers or performatives could just be him trying to be accurate, trying to be helpful, not necessarily to deceive. That's why he's so unique, because he's not giving direct answers, but it could simply be that he doesn't know the exact answer. But when it comes to Dr. Phil asking him, "Did you kill your sister?" or questions about the note, or "Were you there when your mom made the phone call?" These, I expect him to at least know a yes or a no, and I want to see the answers to those questions.
in JonBenet's stomach.
Did you and she eat pineapple together at any time during the day?
Maybe.
The lead investigator says one of the reasons that he believes that you are the culprit here is that on the day of your sister's murder, you never asked about her welfare.
Plus,
what did JonBenet's young brother reveal to investigators?
The police did talk to Burke, unbeknownst to the Ramsey family.
It's been 20 years. What I'd like to do is show you some footage from that interview. Nobody in the world has seen this before.
The never-before-seen Dr. Phil's exclusive interview with Burke Ramsey continues from Boulder, Colorado.
The mystery of who killed 6-year-old pageant queen JonBenet Ramsey on Christmas night in 1996 is still an unsolved mystery after 20 years. The little girl's body was found wrapped in a blanket in the basement of her family's home here in Boulder, Colorado.
The detail about her body being wrapped in a blanket is interesting because when John earlier said, "I opened the door, there was JonBenet." How did he know right away it was JonBenet? Was her head poking out? Because if it was just a pile of blankets in a room that he said was the junk room with the lights, down, dark, would he really know it was her that quickly? And even if he could see the shape of her body, would his mind really be that open to the idea that his daughter was still in the house, laying on the ground as a cadaver wrapped in a blanket? I think there's something about when he told that story that's still in my head. It rings as if it's deceptive, not just because of the shift between past and present tense, but also how performative it is, right? I open the door, there's JonBenet. A huge surprise to me. Let me know in the comments if it also struck you that way. And it's a little bit nebulous, so I don't want to linger on it too much because I like to tie every piece of analysis I do to a rule, to something that we've seen in other cases or is empirically associated with deception. But there was something about that phrase that rang deceptive, as well as the evidence backing up the fact that it probably was deceptive. Like we just saw here, she was wrapped up in a blanket. Would he really have known it was her that quickly?
The house is now hidden with trees. but the haunting memories still remain in the forefront of America's mind. The Ramsey family insisted there was a killer on the loose, but the Boulder police didn't look far. They believed the killer was someone inside this home, someone in the Ramsey family. There were 3 people known to be in this house on the night JonBenet was murdered. Only one has never spoken publicly. Today, JonBenet's older brother, Burke Ramsey, reveals more details about what he says happened the night his sister was murdered. Did you go to JonBenet's funeral?
Yeah. Yep.
The body of 6-year-old JonBenet Ramsey was laid to rest in Atlanta today.
All right, and just notice how he answered that question, yeah, yep. He was answering honestly. In the future, let's say Dr. Phil asks him, did you kill your sister? If he doesn't say no or something just as reliable, we need to red flag it. Because we know that when he's telling the truth, he's perfectly able of giving a direct, clear, concise response.
But the mystery surrounding her strangulation is far from over.
Yeah, I remember the viewing. I remember the casket was small and her eyes were closed. I think one of her eyes was a little bit like droopy or something, and I thought that was weird.
How did you feel seeing her?
A lot of sadness. I don't think I really fully grasped, like, after this, I won't see her again. I remember my parents being really upset. I remember my dad leaning down and giving her a kiss.
Did you have anything to say to her when you saw her in her casket?
I just kind of stood there, I guess, in kind of disbelief. Or I don't remember if I put anything in it.
Was it traumatizing to see her?
That was weird. That was traumatizing a little bit. Had I ever been to a funeral before, period? I'm not sure.
Who was with you when you were standing and viewing her?
Me and my mom and my dad.
How were they behaving?
You could tell my dad loved my sister a lot, and they were both crying, just saying goodbye, I guess.
In the days after the funeral, as a 9-year-old watching your parents go through this, were you concerned about your mother?
I don't think I was thinking about it that in depth. I think I was just wanting people to be not sad, but she would cry and cry, and then I think she would like maybe fall asleep or something, and then she'd start crying again. They'd tell me to come upstairs and comfort her.
While the police cannot force someone to talk, there are several key people investigators would like to question. Tops on the list, John and Patsy Ramsey, as well as their son Burke. All 3 talked with detectives early in the investigation, but recently they refused to take any more questions. Questions the police want answered.
During the course
Regarding people not talking to the police, as a rule of thumb, I try not to hold it against people because it is your right not to speak to the police. Also, JonBenet was not missing. For example, they knew she was dead. So it's not like they could gain anything by speaking with the police. So I don't really hold it against them. Unlike the McCanns, for example, whose child was allegedly abducted, yet they still refused to speak to the police. That I'm more inclined to hold against someone, because if your kid is missing, the first thing you should want to do is answer all the police's questions so they can rule you off as a suspect and go focus on catching the real killer and saving your kid before it's too late. But when you're already aware your kid is dead, speaking to the police really might only do you more harm than good. Even if you're innocent, you might say something that sounds guilty and lead them down a path that will give them probable cause to at least detain you and at least take things to the next stage. So regarding the Ramseys not speaking to the police, it doesn't factor into my analysis at all.
In the course of this case, we can point to many things that the Ramseys did wrong, but you can also point at horrible things that the police did.
I agree with this guy. Like I said earlier, you have to escape binary thinking. The police are bad, and the Ramseys, in my opinion, are bad. Both are bad.
A day or 2 after this tragic death, John Ramsey, who has every right to take the body of his daughter back to Atlanta and bury her, But the police hadn't gotten the type of interviews that they felt they wanted or maybe should have had. So the head of the detectives, John Eller, threatens and says, I'm not going to release the body unless you give me the interviews. The district attorney, Alex Hunter, almost killed him. You know, constitutionally, he can't do it. This is exactly the problems that started to build between the police and the Ramseys, which made the Ramseys more defensive, made the police more aggressive. And in the middle of it is Alex Hunter and his team trying to figure out, is there probable cause? Were the Ramseys involved?
America is suffering because they have lost faith in the American family.
You went on CNN with Patsy, and how did that go?
That was the last thing that we wanted to do, but our friends were really pressuring us to do that. They saw this tide flowing against us and this swelling of suspicion, I guess, and they said, no, you've got to do an interview, you've got to go on television, you've got to show who you are, and that'll stop this.
I will tell my friends to keep your babies close to you. There's someone out there.
As you look back on that, was that a mistake?
Yeah.
Why?
Well, for several reasons. One, it served no purpose. We're I'm sure in a state of shock. And secondly, once you participate in the public arena, you become a public figure.
Nearly a week later, crime scene investigators are still combing through the home. Police haven't named any suspects, but curiously they are saying that the public at large is not in any danger, that there is not a random killer on the loose.
It didn't help the Ramseys' image that they stopped cooperating with the police. The police went public right after the first CNN interview that John and Patsy gave.
There's someone out there.
There's someone out there. This reminds me of the narrative pushing we see in other cases on the channel, right? So if you're not aware, I've got playlists about Madeleine McCann, Summer Wells, JonBenet Ramsey, William Turrell, and what they all have in common is the parents conclusively saying their kid was kidnapped without any evidence of an actual kidnapping. And the only difference between all those and JonBenet Ramsey is the Ramseys actually have a ransom note and they have their daughter's body. The issue here is she says there's someone out there when the ransom note said we're a small foreign faction. So if she actually believed the ransom note and believed that JonBenet was kidnapped for a couple hours and then murdered in her basement, she should be saying there's a terrorist group out there, or there's people out there kidnapping children. But she says there's someone. Why? This indicates that she probably doesn't believe the note. Why would she not believe the note? Why would she not believe that there's a small foreign faction out there? Because in my opinion, she wrote the note. So the story they're pushing is nebulous because they made it up. So now she's just saying there's someone out there because that's what she needs to convince the public to believe in order to get the public not to continue suspecting them.
There's a bad guy out there roaming the streets. It wasn't convincing. And
it's not convincing because the kidnapping note said a small foreign faction is out there, not a random bad guy.
Police had a press conference and said, don't worry, there's no bad guy out there.
People in Boulder have no need to fear that there is someone wandering the streets of Boulder looking for young children to attack.
It was easier for people to believe the Ramseys were involved because that meant there is no bad guy walking around.
Are you aware of these?
It's also easier to believe the Ramseys were involved. Just like any case where something happens to a child, because statistically, if something happens to a kid, the parents did it. So if a kid vanishes, statistically, Occam's razor says the parents are at fault, whether they say they did it or come up with some other story. There needs to be evidence of an abduction for me to write off Occam's razor and say, hey, maybe this kid actually was abducted. In the case of JonBenet, she was alone in the house with her parents and her brother and something happened to her. Statistically, the parents are responsible whether they did something themselves or they were negligent and allowed something to happen to her and then covered it up, which I believe is closer to the truth. I believe they were negligent in letting Burke be around her when Burke might have been violent or dangerous. Burke did something, whether deliberately or accidental, and then they covered it up, like I said earlier, whether out of love, filial love for their paternal love for their son, or just even if you think, hey, these are evil, narcissistic people, even just out of narcissism, right? I don't want to be known as the mom whose son killed his sister, so let's cover this up. Or I don't want to be known as the dad whose little boy killed his daughter, so let's cover this up.
These different theories that are out there, theories that you killed your sister, theories that your mother killed JonBenet, and theories that an intruder killed JonBenet. Those seem to be the three camps that people talk about.
Yeah, I mean, I know that we were suspects. I didn't know they were camps, I guess.
And these are people that post on.
All right. This is interesting. So Dr. Phil has brought up the idea that there's camps out there saying he might have done it, his mom might have done it. What does he do? He talks about the camps instead of denying it. For example, a perfect answer here would be, I didn't kill my sister. I didn't kill JonBenet. Because A, that is a reliable denial, and B, it's not overreaching. He's not saying, I didn't kill my sister, and I know my mom didn't either, because how could he know that? If the story was true, if he actually went to bed and then something happened to her, how would he know his mom didn't do it or his dad didn't do it? That would be too conclusive. So a perfect response here would be for him to speak for himself and deny it for himself. And then maybe say, and I can't believe my mom would do that, or I don't think my mom would be capable of doing that. She loved JonBenet. Something along those lines. But not to be conclusive about the mother or the father.
Just online. The shorthand is RDI, Ramsey did it, IDI, the intruder did it, or BDI, Burke did it. Do you know the theories that they set forth in saying that your mom killed JonBenet?
I don't know the details, but I know the ransom note, they think the handwriting match.
Have you seen it? Have you read it?
I don't think I've read the whole thing. I've definitely seen pictures of it, though.
Did the handwriting look familiar to you at all? Had you seen it ever before?
No. I feel like the listen carefully is very distinct, and I've never really seen that. I don't know. I've never really looked at it closely because I'll see it and kind of get taken aback. And
notice all the hedging he does in his answers. So let's rewind. Now remember, if it doesn't look like her handwriting, the shortest answer is usually the best answer. Doesn't look like my mom's handwriting. Well, let's listen to what he says, and then we'll unpack what it means.
Pictures of it, though.
Did the handwriting look familiar to you at all?
All right, so did the handwriting look familiar? The most reliable answer would be no. That simple.
Had you seen it ever before?
No. I feel like the listen carefully is very distinct, and I've never really seen that.
All right, so he says no, and then he starts elaborating. I feel like it's distinct. I've never really seen anything like that. Feel like and really are the words we're keying in on here. So what is feel like? What does it mean? Feel like is in the deception deck, which is my 52 favorite rules for spotting lies, and it's what's known as a weakening modifier. And what do weakening modifiers do? They indicate uncertainty. So the rule on the deck is phrases like kind of, sort of, and seemed like, and feel like indicate uncertainty, whether they are used correctly by someone being honest or misleadingly by someone who is lying. Any statement following these phrases should not be automatically accepted as true and accurate. So whether Burke knows that the handwriting looked like his mom's handwriting and he's trying to trick us, or whether he's doing his best to be honest and he can't really say 100% that it doesn't look like her handwriting, the point here is we cannot take what he says as if it's guaranteed fact. Burke himself is telling us, hey, it looks kind of like this, but I can't say for certain, so we shouldn't be certain either. As far as I'm concerned, even Patsy's own son cannot bring himself to say this handwriting does not look like his mom's handwriting.
I don't know. I've never really looked at it closely because I'll see it and kind of get taken aback, and it's not something I really want to look at like a lot, you know?
Right. Does that look like her handwriting?
Honestly, looking at that, she would always bug me about having good handwriting, and she would like make me rewrite stuff.
All right, so if you followed my channel for a while, you should be able to recognize a non-response when you see one. Does this look like her handwriting? The best answer is short and clear. No, it does not look like her handwriting. And that's because honest answers are shorter and clearer, because when someone's telling the truth, they don't have to hedge their statement. So they don't have to use weakening modifiers to indicate, hey, I'm not totally sure, or exclusion qualifiers, or any other sort of grammatical construct to indicate that I'm hedging my response. They can just simply say no. So listen to Burke's answer again. And this answer is so bad, it is actually in the deception deck. So I'll read that card after. So listen closely.
Handwriting.
Taken aback, and it's not something I really want to look at like a lot, you know?
Right. Does that look like her handwriting?
Honestly, looking at that, she would always bug me about having good handwriting, and she would like...
Does this look like her handwriting? Honestly, she would always bug me. That has nothing to do with whether or not this looks like her handwriting. Her bugging him about his handwriting has nothing to do with whether or not the ransom note looks like her writing.
Make me rewrite stuff to try to get me to have good handwriting, and I think it's too sloppy.
The police...
I think it's too sloppy. So he can't even say it's too sloppy to be her handwriting. Right? I think it's another hedge. And it's no coincidence that Burke started his very bad non-response with the word honestly. Honestly is in the deception deck as well. And I'll just read you the rule here. Liars often use perception qualifiers. So that's what honestly is, a perception qualifier. Liars often use perception qualifiers which may reflect their insecurity about being believed. Words like honestly, frankly, and truthfully in a statement can suggest deception. So when someone says, oh, honestly, I don't think it looks like that, or honestly, I didn't try to rip you off, or honestly, I wasn't speeding. The fact that they're saying honestly means that in their own mind, they're a little bit concerned that they might not be believed. So just be aware of that. When people use perception qualifiers, it is a red flag that they might be lying to you. Now, does the fact that someone uses a perception qualifier mean 100% that they're lying? Of course not. And then each of the cards in the deception deck has the word, so it's a flashcard, the rule to memorize, as well as an example and a QR code. Well, not all of them have the QR code. This one does, which can take you to a video for extra analysis and more examples. And as I said, Burke is actually the example on the honestly card because of how bad this response to Dr. Phil was. And I'll just read you the example from the card. In 1996, when Burke Ramsey was asked whether the ransom note for his kidnapped sister looked like his mother's handwriting, he responded, honestly, looking at that, I think it's too sloppy. The use of honestly before his response raises questions about its truthfulness. So when he says honestly, we need to be on alert that he might be lying.
Having good handwriting, and she would like make me rewrite stuff to try to get me to have good handwriting, and I think it's too sloppy.
The police became convinced very quickly that either both of the Ramseys or one of them was responsible for this, and that Patsy wrote the ransom note.
Sources also say the writer of the note appeared to have been a woman, and there was deception in the printing style. Certain letters were also disguised in what sources say was an attempt to confuse police. The father has been ruled out as the author of the note, but police have requested a fifth handwriting sample from the mother of JonBenet.
Now, I'm going to ask you to look at the handwriting beneath the document, and I'm going to ask you if you recognize that handwriting.
I do not.
Could it be your wife's handwriting?
I don't recognize it. It doesn't look like Patsy's writing. It's sloppy. It's irregular. I would not look at that and say that's Patsy's handwriting.
Thank you.
Patsy Ramsey gives a handwriting sample. Patsy cannot be 100% excluded, but they can't prove it's her handwriting. And that, of course, makes the police even more suspicious.
The law enforcement handwriting experts had concluded that on a 1 to 5 scale, 5 being elimination, didn't write it, Patsy Ramsey was scored at between 4 and 4.5, virtually eliminated.
So the issue with analyzing evidence and DNA and handwriting is that I'm not an expert in it. Very few people are. But what we all are naturally is expert communicators. And that's why I prefer to listen to people talk, the people who are involved in the case. In other words, I like to go and get the information directly from the horse's mouth. That way I don't have to get my information through the filters of an expert in this or a report that I can't understand and neither can 99% of the population. We can all understand how people speak. So when it comes to whether or not Patsy wrote that note, I don't particularly care very much what a handwriting analyst said. I'll just listen to what Burke says. And Burke, who knows his mother better than any handwriting analyst, could not say for certain that it wasn't her handwriting. He was asked twice by Dr. Phil, and both times, even he could not rule Patsy out. So in my opinion, that's good enough for me that Patsy is still a candidate for having written the note. And if you've seen my video analyzing the ransom note, it is very clear that there was a ton of deception going on in that note. And I suspect the reason for that is because the note was part of a hoax. The parents wrote the note in order to sell the story that JonBenet had been kidnapped.
But they couldn't eliminate her. They should have, but they couldn't because...
And on that note, if you're not aware of the parable of the horse's mouth, where that phrase comes from, I'll just quickly show you where that comes from because it really goes to the root of the analysis we do here on the channel, right? So I don't like to get my analysis through filters, through the media, through another commentator, through someone's attorney, even through a scientist analyzing a report about DNA. I want to hear it directly from the people who know what happened. In the McCann case, the only two people who know what actually happened are Kate and Jerry McCann. So listening to anyone outside of that does nothing for me. I want to get it from the horse's mouth. In the case of JonBenet Ramsey, the only people who know what happened to her are John Ramsey, Patsy Ramsey, and potentially, if my theory is correct, Burke Ramsey. Outside of that, it's all speculation. So if they can honestly say, hey, that she was actually kidnapped, we didn't kill her, then I have to take them at their word. But so far, they haven't been able to say that. And Burke hasn't been able to say the handwriting doesn't look like his mother's. All right, so where does the phrase a horse's mouth come from? It comes from a parable by Francis Bacon from the 1600s. And basically the story is that for 13 days, these people were debating how many teeth are in a horse's mouth, Right, so 13 days, they're going back and forth, analyzing texts, analyzing documents, anatomy, Bible scripture, how the horse is created, drawings. And then finally, after 13 days, a young stable boy comes in and says, hey, why don't we just go out and count how many teeth are in a horse's mouth? And that's what we do here on this channel. We could debate back and forth about the reports like this attorney wants to do here, whether the handwriting is a 4.5 or a 4.7 to rule Patsy out, or a 1.2, or we can just ask Burke. We can listen to Dr. Phil ask Burke and then gauge Burke's response. And as far as I'm concerned, Burke's response was not a definite no, so I am not ruling Patsy out based on the horse's mouth.
Because if you eliminate Patsy, then you have totally blown out of the water the Boulder Police Department's theory that they went with, that it had to be John. Nope, we decided it's not John, so it must have been Patsy.
My theory is quite simple. Whoever authored the ransom note killed the child.
Your contention is she wrote the note.
So this debate here between the detective and the Ramseys is something many of you have asked me to analyze. Let me know in the comments if you want me to analyze this next in the series, this debate. It was on Larry King. It was like one of the detectives involved in the case and the Ramseys. And just based on this quick clip, I don't actually agree with him. Whoever authored the note isn't necessarily the person who killed JonBenet. That's a logical leap. It's kind of like people who point out like, hey, JonBenet may have been abused, and Burke was too young to have sexually abused her, so Burke didn't kill her. Well, that's a logical leap. The person who sexually abused her doesn't have to be the person who killed her. They're not mutually exclusive. What an adult could have sexually abused her, and a child could have killed her, and then an adult could have covered up the death. So we have to escape binary thinking. Just because one person's bad doesn't mean that they're the only bad person involved. So let's listen to what the detective said here.
They went with that it had to be John. Nope, we decided it's not John, so it must have been Patsy.
My theory is quite simple. Whoever authored the ransom note killed the child.
Your contention.
Not necessarily. Whoever authored the ransom note staged the cover-up. That's the only thing that we can conclude here if we don't think an actual kidnapper kidnapped JonBenet.
Contention is she wrote the note.
I do.
You must have conjured something in your head for you to come out and call me a murderer of my child.
That's interesting. We need to see the full clip, so let me know if you want me to analyze that. But he said whoever authored the note killed JonBenet, and then Patsy retorted, how dare you accuse me of killing my child? If he didn't already say that he thought Patsy wrote the note, then that was a pretty big admission from her. That means that she basically just admitted she wrote the note. But we need the full context to see what happened there. So please do let me know in the comments if you want me to A, continue this series, and B, once we finish with this Dr. Phil Burke interview, analyze that one. And I've had lots of requests through my submission form at deceptiondeck.com for that particular interview, as well as in the comments. So it's definitely on my short list.
The police believed that Patsy lost her temper with JonBenet in the middle of the night when she wet the bed.
Somebody that's upset over bedwetting. That's one of the things that's been proposed.
And that Patsy threw her against a hard surface in the bathroom, fracturing her skull. Then she got scared, and she took her down to the basement and staged a sex crime. And because she wasn't dead yet, finished her off by strangulation. Covered her up, then went upstairs, wrote what appeared to be a ransom note, and then at 5:30 in the morning started screaming that JonBenet was gone.
Have you heard that theory?
My big problem with that theory is Patsy is dead now. On her deathbed, I would expect her to say that she did it, if only just to get the cloud of guilt off of her son Burke. She didn't do that. And I think that if John had killed JonBenet, Patsy would have said that on her deathbed to spare her son Burke from having the cloud of guilt around him. I think if my theory of the cover-up is correct, then the whole point of the cover-up was to protect Burke from being seen as a murderer. And I would expect Patsy to do that right before she passed. But she didn't do that, which suggests to me that she didn't reveal who the murderer was because it was Burke. And I am well aware that I have a bias towards mothers. It is very hard for me to accept that mothers can be killers of their children. I'm aware I have that bias. But we've analyzed plenty of killer mothers on the channel, including Casey Anthony. And I just, in the language, I don't see Patsy as the killer, although I do see her as being complicit in the cover-up.
Theory.
I've heard the cover-up part. I haven't heard the wet the bed, fit of rage thing.
What do you remember about that? About JonBenet wetting her bed or wetting her pants?
I just remember she wet her bed.
What would happen when JonBenet would wet her bed? What would mom or dad do?
Mom would change the sheets and all that stuff. And Dad wouldn't do anything. He had to go to work in the morning.
Did JonBenet wet the bed?
Yeah, I mean, you know, did she wet the bed at 6? I don't remember. Maybe. I definitely remember, like, her and me, like, wetting the bed maybe a couple times a week. 2 or 3 times a week. I mean, it's, you know, and I think every kid does that, and you just have to, like, you know, it'd be kind of embarrassing, but parents would just clean it up.
The police theory was that Patsy killed her daughter accidentally out of frustration.
You cannot recall a time in your life that you ever saw your mother fly into a rage.
Coming up.
There are people then and now that speculate that this woman.
Exclusive interview with Burke Ramsey.
Did your daughter have a bedwetting incident that night? Did you get up? Did you get angry? And did you hurt her?
No, I did not.
That's a reliable denial. No, I did not. I believe her. I don't think Patsy killed JonBenet. If she had, especially if it was a bedwetting, it'd be very difficult to give such a reliable denial. Under the stress of being filmed, under the stress of being interviewed by a professional, it's very, very difficult to give a reliable denial if you know you're actually guilty. It's surprisingly difficult.
I don't know what else to say. How else do you say no except no? No means no.
You cannot recall a time.
I believe her. That was a reliable denial, and she expressed the frustration of being asked that question repeatedly.
Time in your life that you ever saw your mother fly into a rage?
No.
Did you ever see her throw anything?
No.
Did you ever see her break anything in a fit of anger? Smash anything down?
No.
Dishes, lamps?
No.
Throw anything at your father?
No.
So notice how he's saying no, no, no. Not honestly, no, that's not like her. So just compare his answers to these questions, no, 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 to the question about the handwriting, where he felt the need to elaborate and tell us how honest he's being, and hedge his response, right? It doesn't really seem like her handwriting because she always grilled me for writing sloppily, so how could she write sloppily? It's apples and oranges, right? It's totally different. That's because here he's likely telling the truth, and there he was likely being deceptive. So even though he's on the spectrum, in my opinion, we can still spot the deception. The big thing we need to look out for is the flashback interviews when he was a kid. Because there, we need to be aware that he might be trying to echo the expectations of the police. He might respond without fully understanding the question. He might be mistaken about what happened, but sound honest because he doesn't actually know what happened. And then he might, at that age, he was 9 years old, literally blur fantasy and reality.
She wasn't into corporal punishment. She didn't spank you all.
No,
She
we
didn't
never
hit
got,
you.
yeah, we didn't get spanked. Just nothing of the sort, not even close. Not to say she never got upset, but nothing near like laying a finger on us, you know.
Right, so Burke knows how to answer clearly, concisely, and directly. Think back or rewind back to his responses about the handwriting, and you'll see why that jumped out to me, why it sounded so deceptive, I had to include it in the deception deck.
Let alone killing her child.
I'm appalled that anyone would think that John or I would be involved in such a hideous, heinous crime.
Patsy had an image problem, a very big one.
I love that child.
She didn't fit the image of what people thought a grieving, innocent mother of a murdered child looks like.
This is another place where people go wrong. I don't care if she's crying, if she's stoic. It means nothing to our analysis. People grieve in different ways. Even if she had killed her kid in cold blood, she could still cry about it remorsefully, right? So crying doesn't mean you're innocent. The same way not crying doesn't mean you're guilty. It's too subjective. People do lots of different things depending on the day, the moment. The best way to tell if someone is guilty and the best way to get to the truth is to listen to people's words. Because people, on average, have vocabulary of around 30,000 words. They go into that vocabulary, they pick the words they're going to use within milliseconds. They construct those words according to the rules of grammar, and then they present those words to you in a way that reveals what their intention is behind the words. It is very, very difficult to lie convincingly. It's virtually impossible. So on this channel, we dispense with all the body language voodoo because A, it distracts from the words, so you only have a limited amount of bandwidth you can dedicate to trying to figure out if someone's lying to you. You can't afford to waste any bandwidth on stuff that's likely not going to help you. It's better to focus on the thing that's going to help you most, which is the words. And then B, just because you have more data, I see lots of comments saying, hey, DD, well, why don't you also learn body language so that you can use that alongside the words and make your analysis even better? Well, more data isn't always better, right? So if I have a perfect 10 analysis and statements, and then I add some lower grade, 5 grade body language analysis, and I combine them, the average of my analysis now goes down to a 7.5, right? So it's not additive. When I combine extra things and all the data, it becomes the average of what I include. It doesn't become an analysis of a 15 grade just because I have a 10 grade statement analysis and I add on top of it a 5 grade body analysis, body language analysis, right? It actually reduces the accuracy of my analysis by adding extra data, lower quality data. So you are the average of everything you do. It's not cumulative. So it's better to focus on the best of the best and zero in on that and only include that and ignore everything else. At least that's my philosophy. And I'm sure plenty of you would like to debate me on that. And feel free to do so in the comments.
Patsy was composed on camera, and I think it unnerved people. Why isn't she crying? Why isn't she sobbing?
See, body language analysis will steer you in the wrong direction if you're focusing on that nonsense. So imagine if I took the statement analysis and then added, well, she's not crying, so she must be guilty. It doesn't improve my analysis at all. It weakens it.
Factor in that they were wealthy, well-educated. Patsy was a beauty contest winner. They had it all. When it was revealed that JonBenet was in beauty pageants at such a young age, and the ugly underbelly of that world was revealed, it didn't help. It made it easy, I think, for people to look at Patsy and go, aha, You probably did this.
JonBenet Ramsey.
Did you go to the pageants very much?
Yeah. I mean, I remember like one of the pageant things or something. She just like go out and just like, you know, like flaunt whatever on stage, and she wasn't shy, I guess.
Right. Did you feel left out of that, or was that okay with you?
No, it's totally fine. I mean, I spent a lot of time with my mom too.
Did your mother have fun with this, or was she a stage mom?
I think she had fun with it. I mean, she did pageants. She was like Miss West Virginia.
Uh-huh.
So I think it was kind of a fun thing.
Was she a pushy type, or did she go with the flow?
I don't remember her being bushy at all.
Yeah. Little girls sometimes get lots of attention.
Yeah.
Did you ever feel like she got all the attention?
No, it was never an issue. I mean, it's just normal to me.
JonBenet enjoys painting, ceramics, drawing, and rollerblading.
There are people then and now still that speculate that this woman killed her own daughter. Not just killed her own daughter, but brutally murdered her own daughter in the most ghoulish of ways that you can imagine.
People that think that show a profound lack of common sense. It makes me angry. I mean, particularly makes me angry now. Patsy's gone. She has no ability to fight for her reputation. It's cruel humanity.
If I told you right now that we have trace evidence that appears to link you to the death of JonBenet, what would you tell me?
That's totally impossible.
This is an investigative technique, a sort of tactical bluff. I didn't even know that these police interrogation videos of Patty existed. So if someone has a link to those, please send them to me via the submission form at deceptiondeck.com, because we could also add that to the series. That would be a great way to actually rule Patsy out completely, because if we rule Patsy out, it's down to John and Burke, and as you know, most of my chips are on Burke, simply because of the way the cover-up was conducted.
The police drew a bead, which means pointing their metaphorical guns at her pretty quickly. They were absolutely convinced that Patsy must be the killer.
Let me change the subject now and kind of transition back to that morning. It was during that time that your mother made a 911 call.
What's your name? Are you Patsy Ramsey? I'm the mother. Oh my God.
Have you ever heard that 911 call?
Oh, it's been brought up a bunch of times because they think I'm on it or something.
Police investigators say that your voice was heard at the end of the 911 call. Were you there when that call was made?
All right, so a bit of practice here. This is an important question because if Burke was down there, it suggests that he might know what happened because he was down in the kitchen when they allegedly found the ransom note, I guess. If he was not there, what would you expect him to say? Think about how he answered all those other questions. Did your mom ever throw anything? No. Did your mom ever give you or JonBenet corporal punishment? No. Not even close, right? Very clear and direct. That's the sort of response we can expect from him. It's the actual sort of response we can expect from anyone who's being honest. The shorter the answer, the clearer, the more direct, the more likely it is true. So now I'm going to fast forward to where Dr. Phil asks him that question. I've not seen this myself, and we're going to analyze his response.
Few crimes in recent memory have captivated and horrified the entire nation like that involving JonBenet Ramsey. She was found murdered in her home in December 1996.
A key piece of evidence is the 911 call that Patsy Ramsey made to police at 5:52 a.m. on December 26, 1996.
Do you know how long she's been gone? Oh, I don't. Please, we just got out. Is she right here? Oh my God, please.
Have you ever heard that 911 call?
Oh, it's been brought up a bunch of times because they.
So first of all, notice how he didn't say, no, I've never heard that call. If he had said, no, I've never heard that call, well, that basically tells us he wasn't down there when the call was made. So him being down there while she made the call could still be in play because he hasn't said he's never heard it.
They think I'm on it or something.
John says, call 911. And of course, Patsy goes and grabs the phone and calls 911. But when she hung it up, she thought she had hung it up completely. And months later, the police discovered there were other voices heard. Now, those voices have come into somewhat dispute. Some people say they hear Burke's voice, in the distance.
It was 5:52 a.m. when Patsy Ramsey made the 911 call from this wall phone in her kitchen to report her daughter was missing.
Patsy, Patsy, Patsy.
Just what happened after Patsy hung up the phone has been debated in law enforcement circles. One former Boulder police detective, Steve Thomas.
All right, so this is a whole other segment, it looks like. We're going to have to introduce some new rules here about analysis of phone calls, especially emergency calls, and we've also already analyzed this call. So let's wrap this video up here. If you want a part 4 where we analyze the final segment of this Dr. Phil interview, please let me know in the comments. A like and a comment is a vote for part 4. And let's please try to get this video to 70,000 views. And if it hits that, I will prioritize it on my list of videos to make. If you enjoyed this video, you'll love the one on your screen right now. And if you want to watch my entire Ramsey's playlist, that is also on your screen right now. Until next time, stay true.